Okay, good morning, Janki ma'am, and good morning to all the participants to this lecture series on Greek mythology, and we are exploring its relevance in contemporary literature. And today we'll be talking about like one of the most significant literary phenomena of the 20th century, which is the retelling of mythological classics. And in this case, we'll be talking about Greek mythological retellings and their profound function as instruments of cultural critique. So, if we talk about the present literature, so we can see that contemporary authors, they are mining the rich veins of Greek mythology, not merely for entertainment, but sorry, not merely for entertainment, but as sophisticated vehicles for examining uh, a few of the most pressing issues of our times. So, what makes Greek mythology unique because it occupies a special position in Western literature. So the stories of Greek mythology are simultaneously they are ancient and they are also immediate, they are universal, they are particular, they are also sacred, they are secular. So they have every dimensions to it. So they have been continuously reinterpreted for over 2 millennia. Yet their archetypal power remains undiminished. If we talk about the myth of Medea or Penelope or Cassandra or Clytemnestra, so all these speak to contemporary readers with startling relevance because they address fundamental human experiences like the abuse of power, the silencing of female voices, the trauma of war, the struggle for agency in the operative systems. So, in this lecture, what we are aiming at is to understand that what makes contemporary mythological retellings particularly significant in their explicit engagement with the social justice issues. So, these are not just passive adaptations but active interventions, and we'll be dealing with works that have used the familiar framework of Greek myth to challenge readers' assumptions about gender, power, sexuality, and social hierarchies, and they represent what could be called a carnivalesque literature. Because the text have inverted the established power structures and mostly they have given voice to the marginalized. So, in this way, you can say that Greek myth provides an ideal framework for such critique because they appear to be politically neutral as they are just stories, but they also this apparent neutrality, it also you may say mask their deep ideological content. So contemporary authors have recognized that these myths have historically functioned to naturalize patriarchal values, celebrate violence, marginalized alternative perspectives. So, by reframing these narratives, the contemporary text have performed the acts of cultural archaeology, excavating the suppressed voices and revealing the, you may say, constructed nature of supposedly eternal truth. With this, we'll come to this very first slides of our, which is the Greek mythological foundation. So, we'll be dealing with those issues in the very first slide, which are like common to every civilization and common to every cultural story, which is the power, patriarchy, and the silenced voices. So, to understand that how contemporary retellings they function as cultural critique, we must first examine the ideological structures embedded within this original Greek myth. So these stories they preserved primarily through male authors like Homer, Hesiod, and the Athenian tragedians, Sophocles, Aeschylus, and Euripides. They reflect the values and anxieties of ancient Greek society. So this society, it particularly came across as a culture that was fundamentally patriarchal, militaristic, and hierarchical in nature. So if we consider the Trojan War cycle, perhaps the most retold mythological narrative in Western literature, so Homer's Iliad presents war as glorious, focusing on male honor. See, if we talk about presentation, so it is not something which a writer has intended, because most of you would argue that when I gave lecture on Homer's Iliad, I told you that Homer's intention was to reveal the cost of war, the human cost of war. So that is correct. What we are doing in this lecture, that how their interpretations have been passed down to us. So we are not talking about what Homer intended to do with Iliad. We are talking about how the function, the Iliad as a text, as a narrative of a culture, as a representative of culture, came down to us. So in that sense, it is presented as an epic about war, which is glorious in nature, where war has been glorified, where male honor has been the center of attraction and focus, and the heroic achievement and the pursuit of eternal flame, Cleos, eternal flame is known as Cleos, were the main pursuits of the text. So women in this narrative, like Helen, Cassandra, Briseis, Chryseis, they have basically functioned as prizes to be won, as objects to be possessed, or you may say as a catalyst for male action. So their own experiences, motivations, and sufferings are largely ignored or minimized. So similarly, we talk about myth of media as presented in Euripides' tragedy, and as the text has been passed down to us. So the focus has been on the presentation of female or feminine excess as a dangerous foreign power. So there's this foreign woman whose passion and whose supernatural power are shown to be threatening the Greek masculine order. So the original narrative, it emphasizes on her monstrosity rather than the abuse she suffers as a woman abandoned by her husband, stripped of her children, and exiled from her home. So media, as it has been passed down to us, the media of Euripides, so it is presented as as a form of monstrous femininity. Rather, it has lost focus of the sufferings of media, and which no way justifies her action of killing her children. But then it also talks about media as a woman, not as a monster character. So that is why these retellings, this reframing becomes important, because somewhere or the other the author's intention, the author's original intent behind writing the text is lost. And similarly, sorry, if we talk about Odysseus, Penelope, so it is traditionally celebrated as the model of feminine virtue and fidelity, and she is granted agency only within the narrow confines of her waiting and weaving. So her own desires, frustrations, and interior life, they remain largely unexplored in the original narrative. So the suitors who terrorize her household for years are treated as obstacles to Odysseus' homecoming, rather than as serious threat to Penelope's safety and autonomy. So these pattern reveals what you may call, the feminist scholar may basically call, the gendered politics within the Greek mythology, which is a system that systematically privileges male perspective while rendering women's experiences invisible, or you may say pathological. So these myths, they celebrate masculine virtues, courage, honor, strength, and while they depict female power as either dangerous or deceptive or deconstructive. Now, what contemporary authors have done, they have understood the, you may say, lopsided passing down of these great works, these great mythological stories to us, and that these narratives have shaped like Western cultural consciousness for millennia, providing templates for understanding gender roles, power relationships, and social hierarchies. So, the contemporary writings, by retelling these stories from marginalized perspective, they reveal how deeply our cultural imagination has been shaped by these supposed ideological structures. Ma'am, can you please change the slide? Yes. So we'll start with the you may say approaches of contemporary retellings and their theoretical frameworks and how they have presented these myths. So, if we talk about contemporary mythological retellings, it operates within several, you may say, intersectional theoretical frameworks that illuminate their function as social critique. So, understanding how these approach is crucial is important for appreciating that how these works have challenged the dominant cultural narratives. So, very first dimension, if we talk about, so it is feminist revisionism. So, drawing on the works of scholars like Carolyn Hilburn and Sandra Gilbert, contemporary authors have practiced what Adrian Rich has rightly called a revision, the act of looking back, the of seeing with fresh eye, or of entering an old text from a new critical direction. So this approach recognizes that traditional myths have been filtered through masculine perspective, and the revision aim, it seeks to recover women's suppressed voices and experiences. So if we talk about the works of like Madeline Miller Circe, it exemplifies this approach. So like in Homer's Odyssey, Circe is a minor figure, a witch who briefly detains Odysseus on his journey home. But Madeline Miller, she transformed her, sorry, she transformed her into a fully realized protagonist, exploring her childhood trauma, her struggle for agency in a patriarchal pantheon, and her journey towards self-determination. So this novel, it reveals that how original myth focus on Odysseus' journey obscured the story of a woman's resistance to divine oppression. Similarly, from the Greek myth, it also might seem removed from a slightly colonial concern. So, you studying Greek myth from post-colonial theory, it provides crucial insights into how dominant cultures have appropriated and reshaped the narrative. So, contemporary retelling often function as a form of what Homi Bhabha has called subversive mimicry, taking like familiar stories and subtly transforming them to reveal the underlying power structure. For example, if we talk about Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girls, it demonstrated this approach by retelling uh, Homer's Iliad from Briseis' perspective. Sorry. As Achilles captured, Briseis was Achilles' trophy slave. So when Achilles captured Briseis as concubine, so Briseis then stand to represents the colonized subject. She was stripped of her royal status. She was forced to serve her captor. She was denied voice in the narrative of own experience. So Pat Barker's The Silence of the Girl, it reveals that how heroic discourse of the original epic depends upon the silencing of its victims. So something which can be like the colonizing of the body, the colonizing of the identity, it can be used to study Greek mythology from post-colonial critique. And then we also have contemporary retelling, which frequently excavate the homoerotic subtext present in many Greek myths, challenging, you may say, the heteronormative readings that have dominated Western literary tradition. So, again, I'm sorry. Yes. So we talk about Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles. So it transforms the ambiguous relationship between the Achilles and Patroclus in Homer's Iliad into an explicit love story, revealing how traditional scholarship has systematically minimized the same-sex relationships in classical literature. And then we also have many contemporary retellings employing trauma theory to explore the psychological impact of the violence that you may say pervades Greek mythology. So these work recognize that the original myths have often glorified, or you may say minimized, the experiences that we now understand as deeply traumatic, the experiences of rape, abduction, forced marriage, and systematic oppression. So we talk about Jennifer Saint's Electra. So it exemplifies this approach by focusing on the intergenerational trauma that has shaped the house of Atreus. So rather than treating Clytemnestra's murder of Agamemnon as an act of feminine evil, Jennifer Saint explores it as a response to, you may say, the years of abuse and sacrifice of her daughter Iphigenia. So the novel reveals that how cycles of violence are perpetuated through systems that deny the marginalized characters the agency and the voice, and the revision text, the reframing of text. It helps in understanding these ignored dimensions of Greek mythology. Can you please change the slide? Yes. Now, if we talk about the thematic analysis, so the contemporary mythological retellings, they address a remarkable change, you may say remarkable change, and also a remarkable range of social issues using the familiar, you may say, framework of Greek myth to make complex critiques accessible to broad audience. So these work demonstrate, you may say, mythology's continued relevance as a tool for understanding and even challenging contemporary social problems. So many retellings, they have explicitly addressed sexual violence and its systematic cover up in patriarchal society. And the Greek myths are filled with the stories of rape, abduction, and forced marriages that were traditionally presented as romantic or heroic. And sorry, contemporary authors have reveal these stories as accounts of systematic gender based violence. So, we talk about Stephen Fry's Mythos. It is a trilogy, Fry's trilogy Mythos. So, while maintaining a lighter tone than the works of like Miller's and Barker's, it acknowledges the prevalence of sexual violence in Greek mythology. So his basically the treatment of Zeus's numerous rapes reveals the god's actions as systematic abuse of power rather than romantic conquest. Then the contemporary retellings have frequently explored the psychological impact of extreme experiences depicted in Greek myth. So, these works recognize that many mythological figures would be understood today as trauma survivors struggling with, let's say, PTSD, depression, and other, you may say, health challenges. So, Madeline Miller Circe presents its protagonist's transformation from victor to survivor as a journey of psychological sorry yes, as a journey of psychological healing. So Cersei's development of magical power, it represents her growing ability to protect herself and others from abuse. So her eventual choice of mortality, it reflects a decision to you may say embrace vulnerability and connection rather than isolation that, you may say, divine power requires. And then also many contemporary retellings, it resonate with current global refuge crisis by focusing on mythological figures who are displaced from their homes. So the Trojan War cycle in particular, it offers numerous examples of forced displacement and cultural destruction. So Pat Barker's again, The Silence of the Girls, it prevents the captive Trojan women as sorry, it has presented the captive Trojan women as refugees in all, but they she has presented Pat Barker has presented as them as people who are stripped of their homes, of families and cultural identities, and who are sorry forced to navigate their survival in hostile environments. So their experience reflect you may say contemporary refugee experiences while revealing the timeless nature of displacement and cultural loss. And then we also have, you may say, many contemporary retellings who have recovered the, you may say, the queer subtext. Just a second. Uh, yes, I'm sorry for this disturbance. I'm suffering from like acute cough and cold, so that's why it's creating disturbance in the lecture. I'm sorry for that. Yes. So I was talking about LGBTQ. So contemporary retellings have also recovered queer subtext in many Greek myths, challenging centuries of heteronormative interpretation. So these work reveal that how traditional scholarship has, you may say, systematically erased same-sex relationships and, you may say, gender non-conformity from classical literature. So again, if we talk about Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles, it presents the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus as a profound love story that gives meaning to the martial action of the Iliad. So the novel reveals that how original epics focus on honor and glory, it usually has obscured the personal relationships that actually motivates its character. And then, very interestingly, we have the economic inequality and class struggle depicted as one of the profound themes in the Greek mythology. So while less explicitly addressed, this theme is less explicitly addressed. Many contemporary authors have explored themes of economic inequality and class struggle through the treatment of slavery, aristocratic privilege, and the exploitation of labor. So the prevalence of slavery in Greek mythology, like from Trojan captives to Heraclius' servitude to Omphale, it provides contemporary authors with opportunities to examine that how economic system in Greek mythology it was dependent on the exploitation of vulnerable population. So these stories they reveal that how wealth and power are maintained through systematic oppression of others. Ma'am, can you please change the slide? Yes. Now, contemporary authors have also employed like sophisticated literary strategies to transform ancient myths into vehicles for social critique. So they are used to understand that how these techniques reveal the mythological retellings and they function as both, you may say, literary art and cultural criticism. So we talk about the narrative perspective and the focalization. Perhaps the most powerful tool to contemporary mythological retellers is the shift in narrative perspective. So, by telling stories from previously marginalized viewpoints, these authors reveal how dramatically perspective shift changes and shapes the meaning. So, the effectiveness of this technique lies in readers' familiarity with the original myth. So, yes. When Pat Barker she tells the story of the Trojan War from Briseis's perspective, so readers they kind of bring their own knowledge of Homer's version to experience a new narrative. So this creates what Gerard Jennett had calls hypertextual reading, which is a process where meaning emerges from the dialogue between the old and the new text. And then also, very significantly, the contemporary retellings have typically employed psychological realism to effectively humanize mythological figures who were originally presented as archetypes or symbols. So these techniques, this technique specifically it makes ancient characters accessible to modern readers while revealing also the human cost of extreme situations depicted in myth. So, if we talk about Jennifer Saint's Electra, it transforms the sorry mythological Clytemnestra from a figure of feminine evil into a psychologically complex woman who is responding to years of abuse and trauma. So, by exploring her interior life, Jennifer Saint has revealed how the original myths focus on divine justice. It obscures human sufferings that motivates the action. And then many contemporary retellings they have also embedded mythological narratives within the historically plausible context, so it revealing the material conditions that shape the story. So this technique shows that how mythological conflicts emerge from, you may say, recognizable social and economic pressures. So if we talk about again Madeline Miller Circe, so it presents Greek pantheon as hierarchical society with clear power structure, economic interest, and political conflicts. So this contextualization reveals how supposedly eternal divine conflicts actually reflect historical patterns of dominance and resistance. And then we also have intertextual dialogue and temporal disruption. So sophisticated mythological retellings engage in explicit dialogues with their classical sources, revealing how traditional interpretations have been shaped by particular cultural assumptions and biases, and even sorry, some contemporary retellings they employ, you may say, anachronistic elements like modern language, contemporary social arrangements, recognizable political structure to emphasize the continued relevance of, you may say, mythological themes. So this technique, which might seem to undermine historical authenticity, it actually serves to reveal the mythological nature of the original stories. So by showing to contemporary audience that how these ancient narratives speaks, these works demonstrate that myths are not merely the historical accounts, but they set up archetypal structures that transcends specific historical movements. And can you please change the slide? Yes. So, the most remarkable commercial and critical success of the retelling and the revisions of contemporary mythological tales is that it reveals the profound cultural impact. So, these works have introduced a classical literature to new audiences while challenging traditional academic approaches to ancient texts. So, we talk about the popular success of books like Miller's Circe and The Song of Achilles. So they have achieved unprecedented commercial success for works which engage seriously with classical literature. So this success suggests a hunger for among contemporary readers for stories that combine literary sophistication with accessible storytelling and relevant social commentary. And many contemporary retelling, mythological retellings have received serious academic attention also. So while scholars recognizing their classical studies, gender studies, and literary criticism, the contribution of, you may say, mythological framework and structures to these areas. Sorry. So this recognition, it represents a significant shift in academic attitudes towards popular fiction and adaptation of mythological studies, and it has evolved mythology into a serious academic discipline. Then, contemporary mythological retellings have also sparked, you know, say, broader cultural conversation about reinterpretation, about representation, about historical interpretation, and the politics of storytelling. So these works have made classical literature relevant to contemporary social justice movements while revealing the continued influence of ancient narratives on modern consciousness. So many contemporary retellings are now taught in high school and college courses, both as literature in their own right and as the kind of entry point to classical text. So this pedagogical use demonstrate their value as tools for making ancient literature accessible to diverse student populations. So if we talk about the contemporary mythological retellings, it, you may say, represents more than a literary trend. It constitutes a form of cultural activism that uses the power of storytelling to challenge dominant narratives and recover marginalized voices. So, by framing Greek myths to address contemporary social issues, these works demonstrate literature's capacity to function as both art and social critique. So the success of these retellings suggests that ancient stories retain their archetypal power while remaining open to radical interpretation. So as new voices which are continuing to emerge, particularly from communities that have been historically excluded from classical education, we can expect that even more diverse and challenging approach to methodological material may come across in future research. So, the future of mythological retelling, it lies not in nostalgia for ancient glories and interpretation, but in recognition that these stories, if properly understood, expressed, and revised, they can serve as powerful tools for imagining more just and equitable futures. So, by giving voice to the silenced, or you may say unstudied, or poorly studied concerns, it revealed the constructed nature of supposedly eternal truth. So contemporary mythological retellings, it perform an essential work in the ongoing project, you may say, of cultural criticism and social transformation. So with this, I end my lecture. If you have any question, you can please ask.